Long ago in Kazakhstan, a shepherd and a farmer lived in adjoining lands. Now, they lived there all their lives, and they loved each other well. Their families were close. It was as though they were related by blood. The farmer's land was lush and green. The shepherd's land was rocky, but still there was a sweet grass that grew between the rocks, and so the sheep were round and happy. Until one spring, a fever swept through the flock, and all of the sheep perished. Now the shepherd could not farm this land. It was too stony and rocky for him to plant anything but the grass that grew there. So at last he came to his friend, his brother, the farmer, and he said, "My family and I will be moving to the city where we will beg for our lives." And the farmer said, "No, my friend, my brother, do not go. Stay here. You can farm half of my land, and when you've made enough money to buy another herd of sheep, then you can do that and go back to your own land and be a shepherd once more." Well, the shepherd gratefully said yes, and so both farmed that land. But one day the shepherd was digging and his shovel struck something hard in the ground. When he dug around it, he discovered it was an earthenware jar, and when he picked it up, it was very heavy. He unstoppered the top and found that it was filled to the brim with gold coins. He took this treasure to his friend and tried to press it into the farmer's hand, saying, "I dug this up on your land, it belongs to you." But the farmer said, "No, no, my friend, you are the one in need. Keep the gold." "I will not keep the gold, it belongs to you." And so they had their very first argument. And when they realized they could not agree what should happen to this treasure, they decided to go and ask for help from the village wise man, the judge. And so they carried that earthenware jar, and they went till they found the judge sitting beneath his teaching tree, a field he owned at his back, in front of him 4 students. And when the farmer and the shepherd explained the problem they were having, the wise man said, let us ask my students what they think we should do." And so he turned to the first. "What do you believe we should do to solve this argument?" "Well," said that student, "they are arguing for the first time in their lives over something dug out of the ground. They should just bury it again and stop arguing." Said the wise man. Then he turned to the second student. "And you?" "Well, I believe that they have come to you for judgment and they should pay you for judgment, and so they should give you the treasure." Said the wise man. He turned to the third. "And you?" "Well, isn't it true that everything, especially treasure, belongs to the Khan? They should take the gold to the city and give it to the leader of our nation." Said the wise man. Then he turned to the fourth student. "What would you do with the treasure?" "Well," said the young man, "I have always dreamed of creating a magic garden for the poor that would have clear water running through it to feed their thirst, and thick grass on the ground like a cushion or a bed or a rug. There would be flowers there so fragrant that they would feed the soul, and trees growing, bearing fruit that would feed the body. If I had such a treasure, that's how I would use it." "Yes," said the wise man, the judge. "If these two agree, then I believe we should give you the coins and have you go to the city and buy seeds. I will give you this field behind us, and you can plant it, and in time you will have a garden for the poor." Well, the farmer and the shepherd happily agreed, and somewhat astonished, the young man lifted up the crock and carried it toward the city. Now, he'd never been there before, and he was amazed at the smells and the sights and the sounds. Before he even got to the marketplace, though, he saw a caravan passing by, and on the back of each of the camels were strapped bird cages, and on the sides of the camel's saddle, birds were tied by their feet with little nooses so that they lay against the camel's side, and with each step that the camel took, the birds would thwack against the side of the animal. Their cries were so pitiful, they sounded like broken parts of their song. And the student said, "Stop!" And the caravan driver stopped. He said, "What do you want?" "Where are you going with those birds?" asked the student. "Why, I'm taking them to the Khan's palace. I imagine he will buy them, and he'll eat some, and he'll cage some, and he'll give the feathers to the women of his household." "Well, you can't do that. You must free the birds," said the student. "Well, why would I free them? Are you going to pay me to do that?" "Well, yes, I will," said the student, and he offered up the earthenware crock. And when the caravan driver saw what was inside, he realized that it was at least as much, maybe more, than the Khan might have paid. He said, "All right then, the birds are yours." And he took a knife and cut all of the leather thongs that held the cages to the backs of the camels, or held the birds by their feet, and he gave all of them over to the student, and then he made his way through the marketplace. Well, the young man picked up the cages and he took them down the road, and he carried all the birds that had been noosed on the backs of the camels. And then he untied the leather so that the birds could be set upon their own feet. And he lifted the cage doors so that they could all step free. He went to a well and he brought back water, and he held it in his hands for them to drink. And one by one they drank, and then they shook themselves, and then they took off and they flew into the sky in every direction. And oh, it was a sight to see, the sky filled with birds. And then they were gone. And that's when the young man realized that he was supposed to use the gold to buy seeds, but he'd used the gold to buy the birds, and now the birds were gone and he had nothing. He felt like a fool. Still, he turned to go home, prepared to take himself before the judge and explain all that he had done, but he stopped first in the field that had been given him. And there he knelt on the bare ground and he wept. But when he opened his eyes, he saw that he was surrounded on every side by birds that spoke to him, saying, "We've heard about you. Our mothers and fathers, our brothers and sisters, our cousins and aunts and uncles, our grandparents have all told us what you did, how you freed so many of our race, and we are here to help you now." And so the birds began to jump about and pat the ground and scratch it with their claws. The biggest of the birds used their beaks to draw a trench through the field, and a spring bubbled up at one end. And so cold, clean water ran through the field. And then the birds all took off flying in every direction, and coming back with seeds of all kinds, they dropped them into the holes that they had made with their beaks and with their feet. And then the biggest of the birds stood at the edge of the field and fanned it with their wings and blew upon it with their warm, moist breath. And grass began to grow in the field, and flowers began to blossom, and trees rose up, and these leafed out, and then they flowered, and then they bore fruit. So that by magic, there before the student was the garden he had always envisioned for the poor. But he wasn't the only one to see it, and word began to spread, and those who had much and wanted more came on horseback and camel, coming to the garden to claim what grew within it. But as they drew close, stone walls rose out of the ground on four sides, and in the middle of one of the walls there was an iron gate. And when the rich men grew near with their greed on their faces, the gates closed and locked themselves with 7 locks, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And they could not enter the magic garden of the poor. One man who felt especially entitled rode his camel up toward the wall, and there he tried to climb on its back and stand and reach for a piece of fruit over the wall, but his camel stumbled and he fell to the ground. He got up limping. He led his camel home. And the others followed, understanding that the garden was not for them. And then those who had little or nothing began to arrive on all sides. And the gates opened wide for them. And they went inside and they found that the grass was as soft as a carpet or a bed, that the water was so sweet to the tongue that it quenched their lifelong thirst, that the flowers were so fragrant that they fed their souls, and that the fruit was so delicious that it fed their bodies with all that they needed. When the sun set and night fell, those who had homes went home, and those who had nowhere to go lay down upon the carpets of grass. And the gates closed and locked 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and kept them safe all the night long. But at dawn, they opened again 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, so that they could come and go as they pleased. And so it was that a magic garden for the poor came to fruition because of the dreams in the heart of one man.